thanks to my Ko-fi supporters that make these videos possible. You can also get a deck review on my weekly Tuesday and Sunday streams. It's the best way to support the channel.
Hello everyone! As the number of decks I looked at on stream passes 300, I want to highlight some cards and archetypes of cards I've seen time and again get cut from decks that I'm upgrading on stream. Now, it's important to note that every card is playable to some extent in Casual Commander, and for each of these cards I'll be giving some ways to use them in a way I think makes them at par in a Bracket 3 deck as a treat. Basically, it's important to analyze these cards in context, which I'll be doing throughout this video. I'll be looking at these cards in the lens of Bracket 3, however, where clamping down on card quality slightly is important. By no means is Bracket 3 competitive, so total optimization isn't a must, but if you have a list where things are feeling clunky, there's a chance that one of these cards is the reason for it. If there is something that you should take seriously though, it's how you look at game night. And that's why I'm super excited to say that Forrest Amel's trading card game apparel and accessory company, voidmonster.org, is sponsoring my channel once again. I need to say that the latest drop is something I've seen in person at MagicCon Vegas, and I can't wait to get my hooves on it. A Swords to Plowshares t-shirt. It's available for pre-order for 1 week, meaning until August 2nd at 12 p.m. PST. So there's only a limited time to grab this awesome design before the next drop from Forrest rolls out. I only use Void Monster playmats anymore, and the shirts are durable and comfortable. This line is quality. Thanks so much Void Monster for sponsoring this video. Let's start then with cards that are just big idiots. What do I mean by this? Champion of the Parish / Perished, Youthful Valkyrie, Tempest Angler are all cards I'm talking about here. Basically, objects that are only there to be a big beater. I'm very low on these grow as the game progresses cards because with sextuple the life totals to chew through, they're just not as conducive to winning the game as they would be in 1v1 formats, and they make for horrific top decks in the late game. When I have a creature that grows with time, I'm more on board for things like Heronblade Elite, her elvish sister Marwyn, or Champion of Lambholt. Cards like this grow with time, yes, but they get bonus utility as well. As it stands with the vanilla and French vanilla growers, I can't help but feel that they're about a token's worth of power in the grand schemes of things in the Commander format. Just look at Voice of Resurgence or Vernal Sovereign tokens, or Constructs that scale with your board state, even retroactively. Even Ashana feels like a better inclusion in a Humans deck than a Champion of the Parish, no? And she feels like a top 150 card and not a top 99 card like she needs to be. Maybe it's important to have a big guy for Rishkar's expertise or something, or because most of these use counters to grow, they could have some fun implication with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, but overall I think these types of cards are super overplayed just because they're cheap cards that mention their respective creature types. If you feel like you have a deck that runs one of these that breaks the mold, let me know in the comments below. Next up is a major PSA for budget deck builders. Please heed my warning. Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds are probably the most overplayed mana fixing cards of all time at Bracket 3. Now, I get it, cardboard can be expensive, but there are actually galactically better options for you for literally 0 to 30 cents more. Before I get into those, let me first say that there is one situation in which these cards supersede the ones I'm going to recommend, and that's if you seriously care about landfall in a budget brew. And I mean like landfalls on your commander, or at least 8 creatures have landfall in your list. That caveat out of the way, let's look at what to replace these cards with in your non-landfall decks. Firstly, the major one I recommend is Ash Barrens. The modality of it entering untapped as a colorless source if your colors are already fixed, or it being a colored source for 1 mana, is a perfect replacement for the first one of these. It even fills the graveyard like Terramorphic Expanse would. Land cycling for 1 is as good as a tap land, which is why I recommend all of my green friends out there play cards like Bushwhack, Analyze the Pollen, Traverse the Uvenwald. Hell, even Thirsting Roots can be good in the proper list. These are effectively tapped MDFCs, although the green pip for land cycling does make them slightly more risky than Ash Barrens would be. I'm also a huge fan of Escape Tunnel in certain Saboteur Matter stacks, specifically only if you run big hitters like Frodo Sauron's Bane, Virtus the Veiled, and his sister Unstoppable Slasher, or Master of Cruelties. I'm not talking about a Dimir cut purse tier combat damage trigger here. You need some heaters for this unblockability to be worth missing a land drop. You might also want to consider the Path of Ancestry over one of these evolving wild effects if you don't care about landfall or filling the yard and are just using it for fixing. People get caught up in thinking that this is a creature type support card, not realizing it's just a tapped command tower. A tap land that can produce 2 mana in a 2-color deck is stronger than a tapped 1-color source. Even in 3-color decks, Path of Ancestry is better than the tapped non-fetchable tri-land cycle, since it at least gives you scries when you play your commander. Lastly, talking about our 3-color brethren out there, Modern Horizons 3 gave us fetches on a similar par with Ash Barrens in terms of power and budget, in the form of the landscapes. Try these out. If I have to cut another fixing-only Terramorphic Expanse from a deck, I will cry. Myriad Landscape is another card I feel that is overplayed outside its niche. I think it only really has a home in low-color, non-green landfall decks, something like Patron of the Moon, which has combo lines, or Go-Go, which can copy it repeatedly, both of which get access to paying for its cost with something like an Omen Hawker or an Enigma Jewel. I also think it's fine in an instant speed control deck outside of green that can hold up interaction or crack it if you don't need to answer anything. Overall, your curve needs you to have nothing exciting to do on turn 3 regularly before this becomes a consideration, i.e. not most decks with a normal curve. Please consider how often it's just a tapped colorless land in your deck. Speaking of colorless as well, y'all know this can't fetch Wastes, right? Wastes is a basic land, yes, but it doesn't have a basic land type, which is what the landscape cares about. Despite this fact, I still see it pop up from time to time in colorless decks. Now I'm going to pass the floor to my podcast co-host, who offered the opportunity to rant about his least liked card for a second, so I could put in the thumbnail.
Hi, I'm here to be Elk's scapegoat for hating on Arcane Denial. This card is undeniably overplayed. Arcane Denial is great when you are playing ultra low power battle cruiser magic where there are no relevant spells cast other than literally the last one of the game. You counter a fog while swinging for lethal, and then you get to take someone out and draw a card. Or they play their one finisher, the only relevant spell in their entire deck, and you can counter that. But in the real world, against real decks, there are likely cards you would want to counter which are not literally the last spell played in the entire game. And that's when Arcane Denial becomes a lot worse. I'm going to simplify my piece here to the biggest argument against Arcane Denial, and that's card disadvantage. Giving your opponents cards is bad. That's just true. They will use those to make you lose the game. Unless you're a forced draw deck like Nekusar or Kami in the Crescent Moon, you probably shouldn't be giving away free cards. Here's a simple thought exercise a commenter suggested that I think makes it easy to see how bad Arcane Denial is. Imagine you're playing a game of Commander, and each opponent has 0 cards in hand and no non-land cards in play. You have 3 copies of Arcane Denial in hand and pass the turn. Opponent 1 casts a game-ending spell. You counter it. Opponent 2 casts a game-ending spell, and you counter it. Lastly, Opponent 3 casts a game-ending spell, and you counter it. Now we're back to your upkeep. You still have 3 cards in hand, but your opponents all now have 2 cards in hand. Suddenly, your commanding position has been completely mitigated. Now compare that to 3 copies of regular counterspell. Your opponents would be empty-handed, and so would you. But then we come back to your turn, and you draw for turn. And you're now the first to play a threat, to pressure the board, to perhaps win the game, uncontested. You're back in the driver's seat of the game, so next time you're looking for a counterspell, try to dig a bit deeper and find something on theme that doesn't create card disadvantage.
Now, I tend to agree with this assessment for controlling decks. Arcane Denial really shouldn't be in those attrition-style brews, but I do love it for combo. For aggro sometimes, if it's 3 or more colors and the double blue of a counterspell would be hard to achieve. And I also love it in any deck with a Mindslaver or Worst Fears kind of effect, since it gives you more objects to play with when you take over their turn. But generally speaking, yeah, this card is rather overplayed. I mean based if you understand that and you're running it just because you hate counter magic, though. Next up is Fexian Arena. Now, yes, it's an iconic Elk joke that I hate this card, but overall, while I do still think that this doesn't belong in every black deck, or even like 70% of black decks for that matter, I do think it has some applications that make it not totally dead. Firstly, the reason why I'm so critical on this card boils down to it being a slow payoff that delivers too little for me. A Fexian Arena needs to at least draw 4 cards before I'm interested in its effect, which means it pays you off by turn 7 if you play it on turn 3. Turn 7 at bracket 3 is where you'll start facing combos and other nasty game-winning maneuvers, so drawing an arena on a later turn means that this card can come in too late. This criticism being said, I've found decks using Solitary Confinement to be a really interesting context shift for the arena. It doesn't matter if you draw it late, since it can just be used alongside the confinement as a lock. Decks running a Sphinx or Shadow of the Second Sun or Obeka Splitter of Seconds also have an interesting home for the arena that could be fun to explore. Basically, I think at the end of it all, Fexian Arena has lost its staple status, but it still has a home in decks with interesting synergies with extra card draws or upkeep triggers. With my next pick, I am considering changing the name of this video to the most overplayed lands in Commander, but it needs to be said. If you're running Reoquy Tower, you're probably wrong to be doing so. For reference, I'm guilty! I run it in my Kira deck that actively draws its whole deck with Rishkar's expertise effects with a Merit Lage on board. In this deck, it's kind of important though not to dump 60 cards in my graveyard because of a weird convoluted combo line at the end, but it's still questionable if running it is correct. Where I like Reoquy Tower is simple. Hand size matters decks. If you have an effect that cares about what size your hand is, makes total sense. Run Reoquy Tower. But overall, I think even in 2-color decks, the colorless utility slot is much better served by a card that actually gives you advantage in a state, besides one where you're winning. Say, like having a full hand. Maybe it's forgivable if you have a nightmarish evacuations heavy meta, but still. Let me know in the comments for this one as well. How often has Reoquy Tower mattered for your brew? And no, it kept me from discarding 3 cards in a couple games is not it mattering. When I asked my Discord this question of overplayed cards, I got a response from Crash, Neon Void, and Alara in the Discord. Link in the video description. They respectively mentioned Chaos Warp, Feed the Swarm, and Withering Torment as cards that are overplayed, and Knee Jerk, I first disagreed. But actually, I think I do agree, depending on context. Now, I would call these cards a necessity for us Chad stuck in the Grixis Shard of Alara, but on stream I've taken out my fair share of Feed the Swarms from Golgari decks that are green. The color with access to so many versions of Naturalize or Vindicate that it'd make your head spin. Same goes for white as well, with some of the most popular removal in the game. I'd say Chaos Warp lives in decks with a white or green splash better than Feed or Torment does, but once you hit that 3rd color, I do start to think it loses its luster a little bit more. Especially if that 3rd color pushes you into Mardu, Jund, Temur, or Naya, all of which have broken removal suites. So while not overplayed in the general population, these cards can be overplayed in certain color combinations that have better removal options. I think overall, if you put a card in your deck without thinking about its purpose beyond the fact that on the surface it looks like it has synergy, or because you figure it's just generically good, and that deck feels clunky, perhaps it's time to go back and analyze those choices. Do you really need that effect to move the game to a close? How does it fit your curve? What's the card's floor and what's its ceiling? That does it for this video. If you're curious about a certain pair of boots or where my iconic ghostly prison / propaganda hatred take can be found, check out these videos. Let me know down in the comments below what cards you feel are overplayed, or if you disagree with any of my takes here. Would you like to see a video in future talking about more cards that are often overplayed or misutilized? Until next time, bye! By the way, I would like to firmly apologize to Grip for every time I've shit on you in the past. Fuck you, Goblin Bombardment, die!